CIBSE YEN in collaboration with Lindsey Malcolm from Turner Townsend. It will cover the different routes to chartered engineering status. It includes academic qualifications, work-based learning, and professional development schemes. We will also discover the key requirements for application process and how to demonstrate your skills and experience. Whether you're just starting or well on your way, this event will provide you the tools and support you need to achieve to succeed in chartership. Now, please, a few notes before we make our way for the speaker today. Note that this technical webinar session is being recorded and the recording will be published online or will be shared with you. If you have any questions, you're encouraged to kindly type them out in the Q&A panel. They will be addressed by Gareth, the moderator, at the end of the session. Lastly, for reasons outlined here and to avoid any distractions, your camera will be turned off and your mic will be muted for the duration of the session. Now, introducing our speaker for today, I welcome Associate Director and Sustainability Lead at Turner Townsend, Lindsey Malcolm. This session is designated to provide essential insights and guidance for professionals navigating the journey toward chartered engineer status. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Aya Rahmoon. I'm the Light and Lighting Champion of the YEN community, and I'm currently working at Arab as a graduate engineer. Up next, introducing our moderator, Gareth Thompson, YEN's Honorary Secretary. Gareth is a sustainability consultant at Aegis. Now, for those of you who don't know or are unfamiliar with CIBSE's roles and responsibility, we are here to promote the intellectual welfare of the members and to improve the understanding of building services engineering within our society by organizing events and other activities related to the built environment. A little bit about CIBSE for those of you that don't know. It stands for Chartered Institution of Building Services Engineers, which is a professional body that operates under the umbrella of Engineering Council. We promote excellence in engineering practices, provide guidelines, and set standards. We have three main goals as seen on the slide: advancing building services engineering, investing in education and research, and supporting built environment professionals. Under the CIBSE UAE, we have different societies that cater to various interests and needs. These include YEN, Young Engineers Network, WIPSE, Women in CIBSE, SOFI, Society of Public Health Engineers, and the CIBSE UAE Technical Committee. Today's session is brought to you by the Young Engineers Network in the UAE. The YEN community is a free-for-all group. It consists of young engineers and students. The events that we create and the meetings are designed to provide support for you as engineers and to focus more on the soft skills and knowledge needed to navigate your career. YEN offers a platform for young professionals to connect, learn, and grow in your careers. We ensure that you have the tools and support necessary to succeed. If you're a young graduate, a student, be sure to check out YEN UAE today. I will now hand over the stage to Lindsey to begin the session.
Thank you very much, Aya. Just to check, you can all hear me okay?
Perfectly fine.
Yeah, great.
Perfectly.
Well, firstly, I just wanted to say thank you for the invitation to come and present today. It's great to be connected with the CIBSE YEN group here in the UAE, and hopefully this is an interesting and informative session. We're happy to take questions at the end and have a bit of discussion around things. But just by way of introduction, the kind of outline agenda for today, I'll give you a little bit of background to myself and my affiliations, my career, just so you can kind of understand the context of where I'm coming from. We'll give a little overview of chartered engineering status in terms of what does it mean to be a chartered engineer, the difference between sort of membership and chartership, the relative context of the engineering council, as I mentioned, and the UK spec, and different sort of academic and experience routes to achieve chartership. All of that aspect of things is focused on CIBSE as an institution and sort of within the umbrella of the Engineering Council and that structure. I would just say I should be sort of full disclosure from the outset. I'm not personally chartered with CIBSE. I'm actually chartered with the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. So when I go on to talk a little bit about my journey, it'll be in that kind of context. But it is worth noting that we all sit under the Engineering Council. The UK spec applies for everybody. So the experience with competencies, the approach to it is all very, very similar. So yeah, just to avoid any confusion and preempting probable questions towards the end. But yeah, so I'm a mechanical engineer by background. That said, I was involved with CIBSE in the UK as well before I came out to the Middle East. So I'm very much au fait with building services, as it were. So yeah, with that in mind, and without further ado, I suppose it'd probably be good to give you a little bit of context about who I am and what I've done and why I'm actually here talking to you. And I'll try and contextualize this a little bit within the context of becoming a chartered engineer, as that's the focus for today. So my current role is sustainability lead at Turner Townsend here in the Middle East. Some of you may know of Turner Townsend, you may not. We're a professional services consultancy with a focus on cost and project management. Sustainability is quite a new thing for us here in the region, so that's been quite an interesting challenge for me over the last 2 years to sort of establish that. I came into the industry in 2007, so quick bit of maths, I've done about 17 years experience. My degree was in mechanical engineering. It was an accredited degree that was linked to the Mechanical Engineering Institution, and I'll touch more on the relevance of that later. I am, as I said, a chartered engineer, a member of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. I'm also a fellow of the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce. I'm an alumni from the UK Green Building Council Future Leaders cohort, and I'm also an advisor for WELL on their Cities Advisory Group. So some of you may or may not be aware of the WELL standard that we typically see here in the region for sort of buildings. They are looking at city scale initiatives on that. So I'm part of that group as well. So yeah, as I said, I studied my degree in Bath. I did a 5-year degree. That included a year in industry, and that was spent at Airbus UK, so very much focused on the kind of aerospace fuel system side of things. And I actually had the fortune to be able to continue working with them through the remainder of my degree as well. But when I finished my degree, I kind of decided I didn't want to work in aviation. I wanted to get into sort of the built environment. So I joined Bureau Happold, who some of you may know of as a big global multidisciplinary consultancy, doing building physics and sustainability work with a little bit of building services as well, which is quite cool. And that was sort of my first toe in the water around building services and around CIBSE. During my time at Bureau Happold, I spent a period here in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi at the Urban Planning Council. I was part of the team that was responsible for the implementation of the Estidama Sustainable Certification Standard, which some of you may know of. I also then moved around a couple of different roles, sort of looking at my career development, looking at getting different opportunities and exposure, including spending some time in Singapore between sort of 2019 and 2021 before I came back over here to Dubai, firstly with AESG for about 18 months. And then, as I said, joining Turner Townsend about 2 years ago. So that's a little bit about me and sort of where I've come from and why I'm here. And so building on that, also to get into what we mean when we talk about chartership and what it means to be a chartered engineer and sort of the routes to achieve that. So firstly, I thought it'd be good to talk about what CEng is, or Chartered Engineer. And as you can see there on the screen, the Engineering Council definition describes chartered engineers as those individuals who develop solutions to engineering problems using new or existing technologies through innovation, creativity, and change. And they may also have technical accountability for complex systems with significant levels of risk. So I think what's quite interesting about this is really the focus for me for chartership and being a chartered engineer is not just about what you know, but about how you apply it and the responsibility you take in doing that. And you'll see that reflected as we talk a little later about the competencies that we have to demonstrate. But it's very much about not just that you have the theoretical knowledge, you've got that sort of technical understanding that comes from your degree, your studies, your ongoing training, your continued professional development, and what you learn in your roles, but it's the application of that knowledge as well. Being able to say, okay, here's my technical understanding, and here is how I'm putting that into practice through product development, through service offering, through project delivery, and things like that. And having that level of ownership and responsibility to say, okay, this is me that has done this, I am accountable. Within the definition of chartered engineer, it also looks at the skills you need to work within the professional environment. So it's not just saying, well, I can wear my CIBSE hat and I can tell you all about building services, but actually that I need to do that in a context of a company that has to operate in terms of its finance, its people, and getting that balance between technical solutions and socioeconomic factors as well. So really, it's about being a well-rounded professional, and the engineering components at the core of it, but it's not the sole aspect of it. And similarly, it's about sharing that knowledge and experience. So having the ability to develop others and work and to train them and to help them grow, which is hopefully part of what I'm doing here today, but also about having good interpersonal skills. Because for us as engineers, we have to develop the solutions for the world around us, and we have to ensure that other people understand what those mean, how to implement them, and how to engage with them. So if we can't communicate our ideas, if we can't share our knowledge in a way that's accessible, then we're not really succeeding as engineers. So CEng as the title, and I'll continue to use CEng throughout, if that's okay, just so everybody don't have to keep saying Chartership and Chartered all the time. CEng is open to anybody who can demonstrate the competencies and commitment. So it doesn't matter necessarily what your background and experience is. It doesn't matter at what stage you are in your career. At the time that I got my chartership, I'd got about 4 or 5 years experience. My manager, who'd got 15 years, hadn't yet got his. And so you can do it at any point that you want to. Typically, it's about saying, well, I feel I have the competencies, I have the experience, and I can demonstrate that I have achieved those in line with the UK spec. And I'll come on to what the UK spec is in a minute. But I also just wanted to touch briefly, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but briefly to sort of recognize there is an academic aspect to chartership, and that's sort of the starting point for all of us. And I think that's probably one of the things that we all have in common on this call, is that we have either done an engineering degree of some sort to a master's level, or that we have a bachelor's degree and some level of further education beyond that, leading up towards a master's level of study. Now, there is a experiential route that I'll talk a little bit about later that ties back into that as well, and shows that instead of the sort of the master's equivalent of academia, you can also have that professional hands-on experience. But I think having that base level of knowledge through the bachelor's is kind of the core thing that we all have in common, as I say. So typically on our journey to being chartered, the first step is to become a member of a engineering institution. So that would be registering your interest either as a young member, for example, with CIBSE Yen and the group here today, or as a sort of an associate or affiliate member, depending on how the different bodies define it. Now, typically, this will be a professional institution that is registered under the Engineering Council. As I said earlier, the Engineering Council is the umbrella group that oversees all of the professional engineering institutions. And CIBSE, as part of that, is a licensed professional engineering institution. And they will be the awarding body who will say, yes, in due course, we recognise that you are a chartered engineer. Typically, people join the institution that's closest to the discipline that they work in. So, as I said myself, I joined the institution of mechanical engineers. I was actually also a young member of CIBSE when I was in London. I had a lot of colleagues who sort of got certified within different institutions depending on their leaning and background. I had colleagues, in fact, who got certified under the Institute of Physics, for example, because their degree and the building physics work they were doing was more closely aligned to that. But typically, people can tend to go for the one that's most aligned with their academic background and what they're doing day to day in their profession. And that is mainly because you're looking ultimately to show that you are competent as an engineer. And the best way to do that is to be affiliated with a body who can best understand that. And so you want to sort of get that relationship and build that understanding. You can have multiple memberships, and particularly when it comes to becoming a chartered engineer, what most commonly happens is that you would achieve chartership under the one that is closest affiliated to yourself. You can then apply to be a member under a different institution as well. So you don't need to get chartered with CIBSE and then go get chartered with IMechE or iStrictE or someone else. You can become chartered with CIBSE and then apply for membership with one of the other institutions. And the reasons a lot of people look to get membership before they start on their chartership journey is partly to recognize that you are a professional in an engineering profession. It allows you to get support and guidance around your professional development. So, for example, being a young member of CIBSE, you can be here today to be part of this discussion. You can also get involved in events and seminars and conferences, which helps develop your continued professional development. It helps build up your competencies and understanding. It can introduce you to new ideas or initiatives that sit outside your kind of core day-to-day. It gives you access to the membership journals and publications. You can get access to the technical library and things like that. And you can also get support around careers advice, around health and legal advice as well. I'll touch a little bit more on it later, but as engineers, we do have a duty of responsibility. And sometimes that can be called into question or present us in challenging circumstances. And so the professional engineering institutions all provide that kind of support as well. And it allows you to get involved in specialist interest groups too. As I said, there's a number of different specialist groups that sit within CIBSE UAE. So you might want to focus in a particular area as part of that. So that's the idea of sort of membership and saying, okay, I am an engineer. I want to be part of an engineering institution. So where do we go from there? Well, when we start to talk about becoming a chartered engineer, as I said before, we look towards the UK spec. And UK spec is the standard for professional engineering competence and commitment. So this has been determined by the Engineering Council. And this sets out what do we expect people to do professionally if they want to become an engineering technician, an incorporated engineer, or a chartered engineer. Now, I won't go into too much detail on the Eng Tech or the iEng at the moment. The focus for today is really about the CEng, but there is a lot of information available online, and the the UK spec from the Engineering Council gives a lot of detail about those roles as well. But typically, the UK spec structures out 5 key areas that they want to see competence and commitment. And this is looking at, okay, I have the capabilities and the understanding, but also that I want to be an engineer. I want to have a positive impact on the world. I want to do something to drive change. So these 5 areas, as you can see on screen, firstly is knowledge and understanding. This is about showing that I have the technical background to be able to do my job. The second is around design, development, and solving engineering problems. So that's the application of that knowledge in terms of trying to find solutions and make the world a better place. Thirdly is the responsibility management and leadership. So I take ownership of what I'm doing. I am developing and nurturing others. I am engaging with the world around me. The fourth is about communication and interpersonal skills. As I talked about before, we have to be able to share our knowledge, share our ideas, share our understanding, engage with people in a lot of different walks of life. And then the fifth, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but the fifth is the professional commitment. And that is more a bit about, okay, well, what am I doing as an engineer that supports the professional institution that I'm a member of? What are we as young engineers here in the UAE doing to support CIBSE and CIBSE Yen? How am I bettering the profession overall and ensuring that being a chartered engineer maintains the special status that it should? Excuse me a sec. So I talked there a little bit about competency, and I just thought it'd be good to kind of just mention what we mean when we talk about competency. And I actually pulled these from my original application. So within and I'll talk about the application process in a bit, but within the application, it says, what do we mean? What are we looking for? And so I won't read the whole thing, but effectively what we're looking at here is competency is about the knowledge, the understanding, the skills, and the values. So it's not just that you can do something, but you're doing it in the right way, in a consistent manner for the betterment of the profession, as it were. And that's where those kind of 5 categories that I just talked about, they all sit in that space to say, well, okay, I have the knowledge around this, I have an understanding around this, and I can apply it. And typically what they're looking for when we're being assessed as to are we at the right standard to be a chartered engineer, it's about showing our ability to find solutions to engineering problems, either through existing technologies, through innovation, or our own creativity. And it's about the kind of promotion, the implementation, the achievement of these, typically in a kind of construction built environment space from a CIBSE context, and very much focused on how we engage in the leadership of that, leadership of the profession, leadership of the development and delivery of those solutions as part of design teams, as part of companies, and as part of projects. So I mentioned before, there's 3 different titles, and as I say, I won't dwell into too much detail on this, but really to sort of highlight, and I'm happy to sort of share the core slides afterwards as well, and you've got the recording too, but this just shows the different levels, the different attributes that you have between an engineering tech, an incorporated engineer, and a chartered engineer. What I would say is, when I went through this process myself, the Eng Tech and the iEng didn't exist as routes. It was sort of chartered or none. And what they've started to recognize, the institutions, is that there's different pathways that people have followed and different levels of understanding and application and things like that. So they've created these different paths, different routes. But as I say, there's lots of information within the UK spec guidance. So if you want to understand more about the others, then feel free to dig into that yourselves. So I've talked a bit about the membership side of things and the competency aspects. I think it's important really to highlight why we'd want to go as far as becoming a chartered engineer. Like, what's the benefits really of having that professional registration? And so there's a few of these on screen, and this is from the Engineering Council themselves, but it's also something that's echoed in CIBSE's own guidance. It was echoed when I was applying through the IMechE as well. The first of these is about the improved career prospects and employability. From a personal note, I was in the company I was in, they actually had the requirement for their technical staff to be chartered engineers before you could reach a certain level of seniority in the business. They wanted that sort of external validation of your competency and capabilities. In that context, though, you would then get that promotion, that career development, and you would be able to earn more money. I see it here in the market as well, where certain companies will pay a higher salary or they'll pay a stipend for chartered engineers. It's also worth noting that if you were to go and work in the US or certain other global markets, the equivalent of chartered engineer is actually recognized as a professional status. And so if you have that CEng after your name, you instantly get more money than your colleagues who might be doing the same job just because of the status that's afforded to it. It demonstrates your sort of professional approach. You've obviously put the time and effort in and been judged to be competent by your peers. And that means that for employers or for customers or clients or people you're going to be working with, they see that CEng after your name and they go, that has meaning. This person must be of a particular standard and a particular caliber. And that in turn leads to higher self-esteem. Certainly for me, becoming chartered is one of the proudest achievements of my career. It was really amazing for me to be able to sit there and say, okay, this is what I've done, and for that to be recognized. It's an international recognition. It's something that is understood across all different markets, as I touched on before. It's something where, whilst it originates in the UK with the UK spec, the institutions have presence all around the world, and that kind of competence and the approach to engineering is quite consistent across different markets, and gives you that sort of demonstration of expertise. And that means you can then have greater influence if you want to become involved in member groups or working groups or study groups, or help draft technical papers or lobby government about policy and regulation change. Being a professionally registered chartered engineer can help put weight to that. And then finally on here, it talks about the recognition as a counter signatory. And I debated about including this or not because it's a little bit of a niche requirement, but it's in the UK context, they talk about the fact that certain professions are allowed to sign off for passport applications or other forms for individuals to say, I confirm this person is who they say they are. But what's also interesting is that does translate into other markets, particularly here in the UAE. If a formal countersigning is needed on a document by a recognized professional, being a chartered engineer can fulfill that requirement of a recognized professional. So that just allows you to sign off on certain legal paperwork in conjunction with others because of your professional status, which is a little bit random, and I've never really used it, but it was kind of cool, so I wanted to leave it in. So just to touch on the different routes then, I talked a bit before about sort of the different levels, but within the CEng approach, there are two core routes that CIBSE offer. The first of these is the academic route, and the second of these is the experience route. And this comes back to what I mentioned earlier about the level of qualification you have from your degree or from your studies. In both, there's quite a consistent approach in the sense that you have a couple of sponsors that say, we've been working with this individual, we recognize their competency, and we would recommend them for chartership. Typically, they themselves would be chartered engineers, ideally with CIBSE, but not necessarily having to be that. You'd put in your work experience, so like a CV or equivalent that just shows what you've done, the kind of involvement you'd have. You have your engineering practice report. So this is, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but this is typically sort of 4,000 to 5,000 words that says, here is how I demonstrate all of the competencies through the work I do as an engineer. You have the organization chart showing where you are within your business, and you have your development action plan that shows this is what I am going to do to continue my professional development once I become a chartered engineer, what I'm looking to do in the sort of next 12 months, the next 3 to 5, 10 years. The big key difference is when you go down the experience route, you also submit an experience form. And this just shows where you have had technical and practical learning and development throughout the course of your career that would be akin to academic studies or the experience and knowledge you gain there. It just shows that sort of level up that you have done, the continued learning that you've done, to just show that you are at the sort of the level of professional competency that would be expected for an engineer. So the way the process goes is that you would typically detail out the experience, the knowledge, the understanding that you've got. So the engineering practice report, there's different forms for different institutions, different approaches. CIBSE, I know, is a technical report. For me in the IMechE, I had a form that I had to populate with key questions, but this is just showing the professional experience that you've got through your career, the academic knowledge you've gained, and how that relates to the competencies. So very much saying against each of the criteria, here's what I've done, here's how I did it, this is what it looks like. You then go in to have an interview. And this, as I mentioned before, is why you would try to become a member of an institution closely aligned to what you do for your profession, because that will help them have an understanding about your career. So for me, when I went for my interview, I had 2 IMechE chartered engineers, but they found 2 people who worked in the built environment, so they could relate more easily to the jobs that I was doing, rather than getting me somebody who worked in oil and gas and somebody who worked in aviation who might not understand my day-to-day. So typically the interview looks to kind of build that understanding and awareness to, they're not really there to kind of challenge you or to sort of put you under any pressure. It's more to kind of fill in any gaps they might have seen in the practice report, to gain a bit more understanding about, okay, what did you do in this particular situation, or how did you apply that knowledge? And normally you'd go into the interview with a bit of a portfolio of information. So you can have some drawings or some technical reports or other aspects to hand to sort of show and talk through. There'd then be a moderation by the membership and registration panel. That would be looking at the outcome of the interview, it'd be looking at your report, the forms that you submitted and everything else. And hopefully the result of that is an award, so you become an CIBSE and a chartered engineer. And that means you get to go to a nice ceremony, you get a nice certificate, and you get to feel incredibly proud of the hard work you've done and what you've achieved. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of the kind of the background around what CEng is, how it sits in the context of the UK spec, what the kind of routes to achieve that are. And I thought to sort of help apply that understanding a little bit more, I'd share my journey and how I've got to the point I became a chartered engineer with the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, the IMechE, and give you a bit of a sort of an awareness around that, and try and feed in the different aspects of the journey, the report, the interview, that sort of stuff. So first up, I thought it might be good to give a bit of context to sort of where I was when I was looking to be chartered. So I had, as I say, I'd done my degree at the University of Bath. I had done a purely mechanical degree, but had dabbled in different areas around aerospace and systems design and things like that. I'd got the experience working at Airbus and wanted to build on that because it wasn't just my year in industry, but I kind of continued working there during my degree. It was linked to my dissertation as well. So there was professional experience there alongside my academic, which was a wee bit cheeky because I was kind of double counting the time a little bit, but I wanted to get the most out of it. And so with that in mind, I decided to pursue chartership with the IMechE rather than with CIBSE, because I could see by going the IMechE route for me personally would get that recognition of what I'd done before and had the accreditation of my degree. Interestingly, as I mentioned, it was also a bit of a development objective. I needed to become chartered to be able to make the next step within my company, and needed to sort of demonstrate that I got that competency and that understanding. And so the first thing I decided to do was do a bit of a gap analysis. I was like, what is being competent as an engineer? What am I supposed to be doing? What areas do I need to focus on and develop? And so I sat down with the IMechE's version of the UK spec, and I went through all of the competencies under each of those 5 criteria I talked about before. And I was like, okay, do I think I've got the experience here? Do I have enough evidence from my career to say, yeah, I can do that, I can tick the box? And whichever aspects I thought were missing, I fed that back into my development at work. And I said to my boss, I was like, okay, over the next 12 months, I would like to have some experience getting involved in putting commercial proposals together and understanding the commercial management of the team. I would like to take a little more ownership on certain aspects of projects. I would like to get down to a site because I haven't actually been to site at any point. And so the sort of the health, safety, practical side of things. And so that allowed me to sort of structure my own career development within my day-to-day job to align to what I wanted to do. And the other big gap I had was the fact that I, to date, had virtually no involvement with the institution. I paid my affiliate membership fees, and that was about it. And so I really sort of started to reach out and connect to the institution to understand what was the IMechE doing, what were the activities they were involved in, what could I get as a member, what could I be part of as a member, and how could I sort of support them in different events and goings on. Started to go to events, started to meet some of the people who worked in the institution, build a bit of a network and connections, all of which is really helpful for sort of your own personal development, your professional development, but it kind of doesn't hurt to be known by people in the institution if you're then going to submit an application to be chartered with them in a year or two's time. So, excuse me, just recognizing that when you come to do chartership, when you come to do your application, you might have anything from sort of 5 or 6 years through to 10 or 15 years experience under your belt. And you, over the course of your career, very much kind of get exposure to a lot of different projects. Might be working on lots of different product development or different solutions or ideas or construction projects, such as my experience. And there are certain ones that are going to stand out. And those are going to be things that you're going to want to kind of come back to time and again when you're talking about your experience, your competencies. You're going to want to feed those into the narrative of your professional application. And so for me, I'd sort of just highlighted here kind of 6 of the projects I'd worked on that all in their own way fed into a different aspect of my chartership application, whether it was doing technical papers that got submitted to conferences for different studies, whether it was the policy development work that I did with Estadama, working on something flagship and iconic like the Olympic Games. What I found interesting actually when I was putting the deck together for today was just how much of my experience, even at that stage of my career, was focused in the Middle East. And it's interesting still to this day how much of this experience I lean on sort of 10 years down the line. But it was sort of, for me, I tried to pick projects that highlighted different ways of working, different skill sets aligned to different parts of the competencies, but also from different stages of my career. So I could show that level of development and understanding, increased exposure, the commercial and technical leadership, all that side of things. as I mentioned before, I was also getting actively involved in what the institution was doing. And one of the aspects around that was a young members technical competition that the IMechE ran. This was around late 2008, early 2009. They were doing a series around climate change mitigation, adaptation, and geoengineering. And they ran a couple of young members competitions to come up with ideas for what could be implemented to enhance mitigation, what could be implemented around adaptation. And the one that we entered was about geoengineering. And myself and the group I was with, there's about 5 or 6 of us, all young members, came up with this solution about integrating algae into buildings as a biofuel. So it would grow within the buildings and it would then be harvested and used to sort of fuel the building. And this idea won their technical competition. And along with a couple of the other ideas was fed into a technical report that the institution published in August of 29 on the run-up to COP15 in Copenhagen. So for those who are aware of COP from being in the UAE last year, we often talk a lot about the Paris Agreement, the Glasgow Accords, but before even Paris, COP15 in Copenhagen in 2009 was one of the significant stages in the journey around recognizing the challenges we faced and the need to take action. And so the IMechE in the run up to that had produced these reports based on young member ideas. So we as young members were getting exposure, not just within the institution, but within national press. I ended up being in a live debate on national television with virtually no notice, which is one of the most terrifying things I've ever done in my life. But it was really good for sort of building that profile, that awareness and that experience, and gave me something very, very different to what I had done previously with both my career and with the institution as well. And that was just on the chance because I'd reached out and decided to get involved in what the institution was doing. So when it came to putting my application together, as I mentioned, for IMechE, I had an application form, and this broke down each of those 5 competency sections. And within that, I then had to kind of word it quite specifically with that sort of overall limit that I had. And nowadays, as I mentioned earlier, for CIBSE, the word count is sort of 4,000 to 5,000 for the technical report. When I did mine, I was limited to 2,000 words. So trying to get all of my experience into a 400-word limit within each competency was quite a challenge. For the interview, as I said, I had 2 industry peers who'd come from the buildings industry, the built environment industry. So they had an understanding of the kind of work I'd been doing. I went in and presented to them to sort of say, here's my experience, here's what I've done, here's how I feel I meet the competencies. I had the portfolio of evidence so I could talk through particular solutions with them. And we had a bit of a Q&A and a discussion. As I mentioned before, the interview is very much about trying to find out more additional detail. Then they weren't trying to cross-examine me or anything. It was just trying to sort of fill in some of the gaps. Within the competencies, and I won't go into the full detail of the application, but there was a few things that kind of jumped out to me as being interesting. And this is why I really recommend that experience of looking through the competencies as soon as you want to start thinking about chartership, doing that gap analysis to see where am I at and what do I want to do. Because for me, these sort of 5 areas were all things that I felt, actually, I don't know if I've got the right experience to demonstrate this. So the application of technology was a really interesting one, because I kind of felt like day to day I'm working on design projects. How do I show that I'm doing something with technology? And this was a time before BIM being kind of commonplace. So I was sort of looking at, okay, well, I've got a few Excel spreadsheets, but maybe I can talk about projects where I've used renewables or things like that. Analysis and solution of problems is really key. And with that, showing how does that apply to the real world? So not just, well, yeah, we came up with this idea and told the architect to do it, and they did. But actually, here was the challenge that arose on the project. Here was the analysis that we carried out and the solution that we identified, and here's how it was implemented. The technical and commercial leadership, as I mentioned, like the commercial side of things in particular, was a little bit of a gap for me. Interpersonal skills, I have always absolutely hated public speaking and presentations, which does make me question why I'm here today. But anyway, so this was something I sort of tried to challenge myself in a little bit, was particularly at that time, I'd sort of presented things in project meetings, but I hadn't really done much outside of that. And so that was something, particularly with that technical competition the IMechE ran, that was something that gave me the window of opportunity there to be able to say, well, okay, I presented to the institution, I presented on behalf of the institution to really sort of demonstrate that. And then lastly, the commitment to professional standards. And to be honest, this one, I actually had to dig out what are the professional standards? Like, what's the IMechE's sort of statement that we as engineers should do? And do I even know what that is? So I went into the interview really paranoid that they were going to grill me on what do we do as engineers? How are we doing it? Whereas, of course, they didn't. But that was my mindset at the time, was actually, I probably should know this. So yeah, and I just thought this would be helpful to share the considerations. And I think this for me is kind of going, right, what do I think is useful for you when it comes to putting your chartership together? I think firstly, link your experience to the competency. You might have worked on this absolutely amazing project that was like the favorite thing that you did, but actually it doesn't really show added value in terms of the competencies. And so cut it aside, save it to talk about at the interview as an additional example, but really try and focus on what's the competency wanting me to demonstrate and how do I show my experience. Get that breadth around the projects, the technical opportunity experience. Like, how have I gone out and helped win work? Have I been part of teams that have bid? Have I put commercial proposals together? What about managerial experience? And that doesn't just have to be, oh, well, I am line managing people, because that's hard experience for us to get early in our career. But it might be being part of a committee that runs a young members group in a professional institution, for example, or having sort of leadership of a piece of work and delivery of that on a project. Research and innovation, and for me at the time, sustainability as well, were very much at the core. And I think what's interesting with this is tying this back to the development of the profession. So it's not just saying, oh, well, yeah, I've been working on this interesting, innovative project, but actually this is what we as engineers do, and this is how it's sort of having that impact on the world around us. And that ties into the practical implementation as well, making sure that the theory and the knowledge that we have as engineers, that's what you're using on the projects. It's not that you're just turning up and telling somebody to do something, but it's actually the basis behind that. Collaboration is obviously quite core to this. And I would say always try and communicate about what your personal contribution was. We are always working as part of teams as engineers, and it's very easy to say, well, then we did this on the project, and this was the outcome, and this was what we did for the client. Whereas the narrative really should be about I and me. And that can be quite hard for us to do as engineers sometimes. Like, you don't always want to blow your own trumpet, but it's really key. That's what they're looking to see. And that will be the kind of stuff that will get asked about in the interview. But like, oh, you talk about this particular example, but what did you do? What was your role on this? Communication. Like, how are you doing it? Where are you doing it? How do you achieve it effectively? For this, it's the written communication that we do, the verbal communication that we do, but also the ability to communicate with different people in different ways in different contexts. So have you been engaging with academia, with your peers, with, I always used to say architects and engineers speak a different language, even though we're both talking in English. We think differently, we approach things differently. Once you add in cost consultants and clients and project managers, then you've got a hugely multilingual room. So being able to communicate technical ideas to non-technical audience is a really strong skill set. So if you've got that, throw that in. Make sure you understand the codes of conduct for the professional institution. IMechE had them, CIBSE has them as well. And make sure you understand around health and safety. For me, it was something that wasn't really part of my day-to-day job, but I actually, during the course of it, went out and got myself accredited for like construction site access and did my sort of health and safety awareness, just because I knew it'd be something else I could just tick off the list relatively easily. Really hone in on what the continued professional development is as well. Like, it's not just about, okay, I'm chartered, that's it, but where do you go from here? What's the longer term plan? And unlike me, with the amount of talking I'm doing, try and keep the narrative brief. You've got a word count, be to the point, be effective in it, and try and kind of give them enough of an understanding that you can go into the interview and tell them the full story. So last but one slide, I think, just to kind of close this out and give us sort of 5 minutes or so for Q&A at the end. I thought it interesting to talk about the impact on my career before I sort of closed out, because it's been quite an interesting journey. As I said earlier, I felt really proud of becoming a chartered engineer. It's still to this day, it's one of my biggest achievements in my career. But being quite honest about it, I don't think it's necessarily had a huge impact on where I've gone or what I've done. But then I don't know what the counterfactual will be. I don't know what the situation would be had I not been chartered. I think it's the idea about having a development action plan, having a clear structure or an idea for where I want my career to go and the goals around that is something that's stuck with me. It's not been the same at all. In fact, I looked back at what I'd put into my application for my chartership, and virtually nothing that was in that career plan ever came to fruition. But the idea of having that sort of short, medium, long-term look ahead is really good. And that's something that's fed into professional coaching. So I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to be coached by some amazing people over the years, continuing to review my own capability, my intention, what's important for me, what do I value, and is that still a guiding principle in my career? And being able to share that on in turn and to be guiding others through mentoring, supporting others on their journey to chartership with CIBSE, with the IMechE, with other institutions. And I think it's something, it's quite interesting. I think when you're in a network that has other engineers or other professionals around you, there's a real strong value that's recognized by our peers. And I see it in the market a lot here, and I'm guessing a lot of you have seen it as well, where you'll have an email from somebody and on their signature they'll have more letters after their name than are in their name. And quite often it's things like lead AP or SDNOM, PQP or something like that. But quite a lot of people will also be like, oh, I am a fellow of RICS, or I am a MEng, MCIBSE, or MIMechE, or whatever it might be. And there's a real like value when you see that. You go, oh yeah, this person knows what they're talking about. And as I mentioned earlier, the employers see that as well. Varies market to market. Certainly, I think when I was working in Singapore before I came to the UAE, there was a much greater emphasis on that within the market there, with the value of being chartered, than there maybe is here in the Middle East. But it is something we see changing. And I think the actions, the activity that's happening from the institutions, and particularly from CIBSE and RICS and others, is really starting to drive that change. So yeah, a few final thoughts to close out. Firstly, I think it's important to recognize heritage. Like, being an engineer is one of the longest standing professions. You think back to the Industrial Revolution, the shaping of the modern world, like there's a lot of history there. We also have a lot of responsibility for where we are right now when you think about things like climate change and the pressing issues that we have in the 21st century. So whilst there's a couple of hundred years that sit behind us, there's several decades of our careers that sit in front of us. And so we need to build on those foundations and use that as a mechanism to have an impact and to help shape the world around us. It's worth noting I'm a fourth generation of engineer within my family. Not that it was planned that way, but my dad's a civil engineer. My grandfather was a aviation engineer, and my great-grandfather was a mechanical engineer. And so, yeah, purely by circumstances, it's in my blood in a way. It's important to recognize the nature of the institution, the structure. Like, it's a powerful word, institution, and you should never forget that it's a body that is out to create change, and to be part of that journey, to be a member of that, I think is really important. We have a really important role in society to affect change, to solve problems, to make the industry, the profession, the world a better place, and to try and do that in a competent and effective manner. And finally, just to close, I'd say it's important to recognize that it's your journey. You can take this at your own pace. You can go in your own direction. You don't have to do it because everybody else is doing it. You don't have to do it at a certain point in your career. You can do it in the way that works best for you. and supports your own development. And finally, I'd say it's also important to recognize that it's just one step on your journey. And your development, your growth, that's going to continue throughout your whole career. So yeah, just do what you can, have the impact that you can, and really sort of think about where do I want to go, and what's the impact that I want to have on the world around me. So yeah, and that's it from me. Hopefully that's been interesting, and I'm going to stop talking now and hand it back to Gareth and Aya. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. It's truly been very insightful. And now I'll be handing it over to Gareth, who will be moderating our Q&A session. I've put in my own question and hopefully it's not too much.
Yeah, perfect. Just let me know if my screen's on, guys. Yeah, all right. Yeah, thank you very much. Firstly, Lindsay, it was an amazing session. Honestly, I was glued throughout the session. You're very well, like with your articulation, like some of these, I've been hearing from my back in 2019, 2020, about Chartership. People said your course is accredited, this and so on, your journey is going to change, but it never really, like, I never really understood the core of it. But this has given a very good understanding of what I need to plan, I guess, ahead, how I change about my daily work, what I need to do in the future, in the coming days. It's really good. I think, yeah, we can start with the Q&As. I wanted to start with a question. Probably this would be coming personally from my experience, but I think you could relate to it as well. So you studied mechanical engineering, and then now you've ended up in sustainability. I studied architectural engineering. I did mechanical for a bit, and now I'm with sustainability as well, and I love where I am currently. So I just wanted to ask, like, is chartered engineer or chartership still the right way, like, for people in sustainability in this energy field? Like, how do you see it? Like, is it still as useful for us as it would be for a mechanical engineer?
Yeah, I definitely think it is. I think there is something inherent to the sort of field of sustainability that's built around problem solving. And for me, that's part of what engineering is. It's problem solving, and it's applying logic. And so I think there is a value to it. As I say, it's everybody's own journey. And it might be the case that for some people, it's not necessarily what they want to do. It might also be the case that they go, actually, I do want to get chartership, but not with CIBSE or the IMechE, but I might want to go a different route. And there are other institutions out there, and there are other ways of sort of getting that professional recognition. But I think from a sort of an experience perspective, and using it as a bit of a foundation block in your career development, I think it's definitely worth considering.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Aya had a question as well. So she's asked, what strategies did you find most effective in balancing the technical and professional competencies required for chartership when you were documenting it? How did you stick to the word count as well? Because you had only, I guess, 2,000 words, half of what we get now.
Yeah, the word count was definitely a bit of a creative exercise in how short can I make sentences while still getting my point across. I think for me, mapping out where I thought I was addressing the competencies was quite a good approach. And this is an exercise I've actually done with a couple of people since when I've been mentoring, is to sort of talk about, here are the key competencies maybe on the left-hand side, here are the projects that I've worked on, or the experience I've had, or the activity or the group that I was involved in, what ticks boxes. And sort of having that little bit of a matrix. And you might say, okay, I think I've got 10 amazing projects. I've had this professional involvement within the young members group. I've done this activity outside, and you start to find which ones are ticking the most boxes, because that means you can then hone that narrative in. And particularly when you're doing the professional report approach rather than the application form, you can talk about the experience and the approach on a project, and you can kind of note in the margins, like, this covers A2, B3, and C1. And so you don't have to then have that repetition of talking about it in 3 or 4 different places. And I think that kind of mapping exercise to sort of do the gap analysis, but also to say, right, how do I choose where I want to focus the narrative and kind of hone in on the key projects that are going to demonstrate the broadest array of competencies with the least amount of effort.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. Question, I guess, following up to that, wouldn't call it cheating, but like, is there like right now that we have you to ask questions about Chartership? I'm guessing you had when you were on your route as well. Did you have like a matrix or a rubric that you followed on how to document your stuff while you're working? Like, for example, right now, if you're currently working on a few projects, how can we start documenting stuff, what we're doing daily or what we have done innovative against the set of A1 or B1 set of criteria that you were mentioning? Is there any resource available online that we can access right now and sort of get an early step on here?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I didn't have anything at the time, partly because I hadn't really thought about it. Like I wasn't really tuned into the institution or chartership or what it would mean for me, and until it got to a point where I was like, oh no, I actually do need to think about this. And so I kind of went through that process. But I was quite fortunate because the company I worked in, we'd got sort of internal CVs that we use for bids and marketing. We'd got sort of project summaries. I'd got things like my personal development reviews that I had each year, where I'd sort of written narrative around here's the experience I'd got. And so as an engineering based multidisciplinary consultancy, when I worked, their career development pathways actually had a level of alignment to the competencies. They'd want to see technical development, they want to see application of knowledge, they want to see commercial understanding, they want to see leadership. And so I'd been, without knowing it, crafting mini narratives to say, here's what I've done in the last 12 months, and here's how it relates to what you want to see for a consultant or a senior consultant as I'm going through my career. And that was actually quite a helpful tool that I hadn't even realized I had in my arsenal. And so thinking about those sort of things, like what have we got in our professional CVs? What do we talk about in our development reviews? But there's certainly, like, I think now that there's a lot more information available, certainly through the Engineering Council website, through CIBSE's website as well. You'll be able to find the kind of tables of competencies, the breakdowns, the sample narratives or example reports, so you can go and look and see what others have submitted as well. But yeah, I think anytime that you've talked about your experience to sell yourself, whether that's through your job on a project to win work, through your own development reviews, or even applying for a job with a different company, there'll be something in there that'll be useful for you to look at.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for that insight. Another question that we have as well is at what point in our careers, or like I'm guessing you did it at a certain stage in your career, in Yen we have people ranging from tier 3, graduate level, all the way up to tier 5 as well. Like we've got seniors in our group, maybe we have a few managers as well, like starting on. Do you think it is better for us, like I know it's like different for everybody, but like do you think it's better for us at this level, at this engineering level, to get on with it, or do we get our foot into managing and then go for chartership? Would it help us with our career trajectory? uh just wanted to get your opinion on that. Like, is it is it ever too early, or is it ever too late?
I don't think it's ever too late, unless it's at a point where it's impeding your career. But I don't think that would be the case very often. I think there is potential that it's too early, and I think you'll realize that as you start to go through the competencies. Like if you feel that you can comfortably demonstrate with more than one example how you're ticking the majority of the boxes, that's a sign that you're ready. And typically I found that that's been sort of between 4 and 8 years professional experience for most people. I know people who've gone a little quicker, and I know a lot of people who've gone later than that, but the average is usually in that window, because you have a level of exposure to different projects or programs or products or services. You have taken a couple of steps in your career and started to have some level of leadership or management responsibility, either within the project itself or through through like line management of others. So yeah, I'd say that's the kind of window normally. And generally it usually ties into that sort of, I am a senior consultant or senior engineer type level. But it's also something, it's definitely worth checking whether your current employer has any expectations as well. Like, what you don't want to do is be in a position where you want to apply for a promotion next year and you feel like you can demonstrate that, but they have a minimum requirement for chartership at the next grade above you. And that was certainly the case I found myself in, which was a little bit controversial because my boss wasn't chartered, but he was there telling me that I couldn't be promoted unless I was. So yeah, you don't want to find yourself in that situation.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Perfect. Then, so I guess I've got a few years, but there are a few others in this call who have to start, documenting this stuff. But that's amazing. I don't think we have any more questions. Everything in your presentation was very clear. And for the others on the call, Lindsey is kind enough to share his presentation with us, which we will send over to you guys as well. And yeah, thank you so much. If you guys ever have any doubts along your journeys, come in the coming days, please feel free to reach out to Lindsey. Lindsey, sorry in advance, we will be disturbing you. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, but yeah, no, we really appreciate it that you've joined us today with CIBSE Yen. It has been an amazing session, truly informative. I think I speak for everybody. But yeah, for everybody else on the call who don't have an idea of what we at CIBSE Yen do, or at CIBSE, please feel free to reach out to us through any of the channels mentioned over here. We'll be more than happy to get back to you. And you can always also reach out to Lindsey for any of your queries, anything personal as well. But yeah, guys, thank you all so much for joining. It was a very informative session. See you again.
Thanks very much. Cheers all.
Thank you.
Thank you.